Hey everybody, my name is Kyla. Welcome to my channel where I talk about the stock market and the economy amongst other things. Today we're going to be talking about all the things that keep on happening. This is a newsletter, Kyla.substack.com, so go and check it out. It helps with the move. Elon almost blowing up Twitter, the continuation of the SBF-FTX train wreck, which I have several videos on at this point. Housing market continues to get weirder with negative prints in NHB home builders last week, and single family starts came in lower, which is not good because we really need more supply in the housing market. The bond market is flashing recession. Target cratered because they were like, things are kind of rough out here. However, food deflation is coming. The job market is hanging in there, much to the Fed's demise. Retail sales were okay. Rents are slowing. Freight rates have tumbled, and PPI came in soft. Disinflationary data is coming through, but inflation is still a bright spot of worry. The Fed brought out the hammer again last week, making sure everyone understands that they are very serious this time about what they're saying. Bullard is absolutely waving his hands around and saying, everyone calm down, and is subscribing to do more now, to do less later, which probably works in some cases, but maybe not in an economic environment where turning up the oven to 400 degrees won't cook the cake any faster. It's just gonna burn it. That seems to be the Fed's thesis, is that if they go really hard in the paint, if they turn the oven up all the way, that things will just sort of cook the same amount, but it won't. It's going to burn it. They're also exceptionally serious about controlling the market, which is sort of funny because that's not part of their dual mandate. Powell will be speaking at the end of November, and that will certainly be another mallet to the stone. I also want to talk about Elon and the Silicon Valley tech bro. I know a lot of people out there are fans of Elon. I respect what he's done. I think that there's room for both respect and criticism when you talk about any public figure, when you talk about anybody. If you don't have any room for criticism of the people that you admire, you're not seeing them as fully human, which means that you're not admiring them in a humanistic way. There are some parallels between Elon Musk and SBF, the idolization of a Silicon Valley tech bro, the pedalization of people, the founder's first thesis that so many have trumpeted, including A16Z, that I want to quickly discuss. There's a quote that I really like from Melanie Exler that says, when God became lonely, he created man, or was it when man became lonely, he created God? Elon tweeted this out yesterday, Vox Populi, Vox Dei, which means the word of the people is the word of God. An extension of that quote, do not listen to those who say the voice of the people is the voice of God, since the tumult of the crowd is always close to madness. Elon said the voice of the people is the voice of God when reinstating Donald Trump's Twitter account, and if I were God, I would probably be doing something different, but like, okay. And of course, I don't really want to red string this and say, oh look, it surely seems like Elon Musk is comparing himself to God, because I truly don't think that was happening. But there's an underlying theme of usness and how Elon is approaching Twitter. So it's kind of like together, me and lowercase you, if you just take my hand, we can build a less terrible version of this place. But of course, usness is not truly usness, right? It's an overcorrection. We are emerging from this land of the Silicon Valley elite, which Musk is a part of, where this dynamic has become us, the people, versus them, us versus big tech, big money, big media, and Elon is clearly trying to position himself on the side of us and not the side of them. And now there's an idea that things need to belong to people again, right? The problem with the populism that Elon Musk inadvertently champions is that he is still a god in that story. Going back to Exler, when God becomes lonely, he created man. There's a quote that says, there is in our future a TV or internet populism in which the emotional response of a selected group of citizens can be presented and accepted as the voice of the people. The narrative always needs somebody to tell it. A god is always going to need to ensure his own existence by having people be there. One could argue that what Elon is doing with Twitter is weaponized incompetence or planned demolition, the most entertaining outcome, whatever. But then of course you have to ask, the most entertaining to whom? I've made a bunch of videos on SBF, FTX, etc. One sentence summary, this was a bunch of dumb big bets that worked until they didn't, financial engineering that morphed or always was fraud and beyond. Before, FTX was a powerhouse in the industry, so much so that they were bailing out companies like Voyager and BlockFi a few weeks ago. That was going to come back to haunt them. They were sort of associated with this hedge fund / VC called Alameda, but it was like a situationship. They were dating, but they weren't, like everybody kind of knew, but nobody really knew. And there was zero downside to any of this, according to Alameda. SBF was a regulatory darling. He was in DC, his shoes were untied, playing video games, the total oh boy founder genius extraordinaire vibes. The balance sheet was then leaked. On November 2nd, Alameda's balance sheet was leaked by CoinDesk, and everyone was like, hey, why do you have $3.6 billion of FTT and $2.16 billion of FTT collateral? FTT is a token issued by FTX for trading fees, so it's very much like, oh wow, the situationship is a marriage. Alameda said, oh no, this is not our balance sheet, that's a figment of your imagination, which was somewhat true because some of their assets were imaginary. And then CZ, who is the CEO of Binance, another crypto exchange, was like, hey everybody, buckle up. CZ and SBF had a bit of beef. SBF was designing regulation to hurt Binance and the broader industry, so beef warranted, right? Binance had helped to spin up FTX FTX actually sold their stake about a year ago and in exchange got $2 billion of FTT, this token, amongst other things. CZ said that he was going to sell his stake of FTT, said, hey, y'all are giving me super big Luna vibes, that thing that blew up a couple months ago. This was a nuclear situation for FTX because CZ was going to sell. So Caroline from Alameda said, hey, we're going to buy all that from you for $22. The market freaked out because they were like, why would they do that? What's the big deal? Bank run happened. FTX was flailing, so was Alameda. People took out $6 billion. FTX then paused withdrawals. It was bad. Binance steps in and then they step out. Binance was like, hey, can we save you? And then they saw the pit of hell that is the balance sheet and they quickly said, never mind. SBF was tweeting wildly during this time, assuring that everything was fine, trying to find $9 billion to close all the holes, which is something that we all do right before things completely implode. So many things came to surface. Imagine that you were crawling around in a sewer and shining a light down various hallways. That was this. And for Alameda was not too good at trading. They thought they were, but maybe they weren't, but maybe that was actually weaponized incompetence. They got too aggressive with venture. I had a large margin position, pledged a liquid collateral to do more bets. They were essentially well-capitalized gamblers. When lenders were like, hey, can we have our money, please? Alameda didn't have it. FTX had lent $10 billion of client funds to Alameda and said, whoa, whoops, like we're totally misusing assets that aren't ours. But this was way bigger than we thought it was. Sorry. And the worst thing is that Alameda was front-running tokens ahead of the FTX listing. How do you lose when you are the game? The Bahamas, which is where FTX is located, froze FTX assets and directed those assets to their own digital wallet. FTX had allowed withdrawals for users in the Bahamas, but they weren't actually supposed to do that. Now they're asking for that money back. So it kind of created a black market for Bahamas FTX accounts, and FTX Digital Markets filed for Chapter 15 bankruptcy here in the United States. The Bahamas was not happy about that, so now the Bahamas and the United States are going to be squaring up for legal jurisdiction over this case. FTX filed for bankruptcy, and them and their 134 associated firms. John J. Ray III, which is not a real name, the man who liquidated Enron, steps in as CEO, throws his hands in the air and releases a small scream, and I would scream too if I had more than 1 million creditors, $50 billion in liabilities and counting. Binance then becomes a central bank and helps with an industry recovery fund, which is very JP Morgan era 1913 of CZ, but also CZ needs to check out the industry, understand the exposure, and also win the game. The SBF Alameda situation gets worse. Turns out SBF had built some sort of backdoor, so basically Alameda could borrow an unlimited amount of money from FTX. Your $1 million was their $1 million, which is so cute and awesome and illegal. And incredible hindsight, right? Like, of course that was happening. The balance sheet was a nightmare, Crayola copy of some other dimension of reality. FTX's balance sheet was composed of tiers of liquidity: liquid, less liquid, and illiquid. They had less than $1 billion of assets against $9 billion in liabilities, which is not good. Their most liquid asset was Robinhood shares, which, like, of course it was. And they also had this thing, a hidden, poorly internally labeled fiat ad account, that's the name of it, an accidental $8 billion is what SBF said it was, that they sent to Alameda. Accidentally, of course. Like, who doesn't accidentally send $8 billion? Also, their two biggest assets were FTX and something called Serum, which is another coin that FTX helped to create. They were like, these two coins, they're both worth $10 billion collectively. Everything is worth $10 billion if you say it is. Like, yes, my toaster is theoretically worth $10 billion until it's time to sell. Then it isn't. Somewhere in all of this, FTX got hacked too, and that person is moving around a bunch of money. The whole time, SBF is tweeting and other fraudsters are crawling out of the sewer too. The New York Times releases this absurd puff piece and says, hey everybody, our guy is sleepy time, bear vibes, like all good over here. SBF is also still trying to raise money and says that Alameda had enough assets marked to market but not liquid, which in that case, I also have enough assets, and so do you. We're both instant millionaires based on that recipe alone. And then a contagion really starts to come through. We're just starting to see this play out. So a bunch of firms were impacted, as well as Genesis, which is a child company of a group called Digital Currency Group, big component of the institutional crypto system, and they were seeking a $1 billion credit facility and ended up pausing withdrawals. They're the center of crypto markets. Genesis is custody funds. They help people earn yield. They are the yield product for a lot of C5 platforms. Grayscale, which is another child company of the Digital Currency Group, won't share proof of reserves because they're worried about security. And there's 50 plus market makers and fund managers that have exposure to FTX. Presumably they aren't going to want to open their books either because the holes would likely rip open. There's a really good thread that I'm going to link in the Substack. It's linked in the Substack that talks about the impact of Genesis and how important it is. It's a prime broker in the crypto land, which is super important to have. SBF did a Twitter DM interview with Vox where he says, one too many times, says effective altruism was only meant to be effective and not altruistic, and just shows zero signs of remorse. He's not even good at League of Legends. Caroline from Alameda explained that only 4 people knew what was happening, her, SBF, and 2 other employees who SBF also threw under the bus in his Vox interview. The Enron guy is like screaming in his corner now. He's like beating beating the walls with his fist. He's like, stop tweeting SBF. And he declares in the first day declaration bankruptcy filing, he says, never in my career have I seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information. He's like, hey, this is worse than Enron, guys. I'm crawling up the walls here. And so, yeah, and it is. There's auditors in the metaverse spending customer funds on real estate. No one knows how many employees FTX has. They also kept printing FTT after filing for bankruptcy. They had no accounting department. A bunch of people are getting sued now. And the VCs that invested are like, hee whoopsie, like marking this down to zero, due diligence. We thought you meant dilly-dally in a field of daisies. And of course, FTX cross-invested in some of the VCs, so everyone gets a piece of the pie, I guess. Some VCs passed because they said, hey, no, we prefer to pump and dump. We like our fraud to be a little spicier. FTX really raised a ridiculous $420 million from 69 investors last year. Turns out SBF pocketed $300 million of that. Of course. But don't worry, like the VCs are going to dream a little less. Like, don't worry. It just keeps on getting worse. Michael Lewis was there, so at least we'll get a good book out of it. But millions of people lost a lot of money, and it created a cascade that just probably began. I've been covering this extensively on YouTube. I did a piece for Bloomberg, 2 pieces for Bloomberg on it, as well as some stuff for Bankless. I'll link all that below as well. But yeah, criminal behavior. Fraud. Get them out of here. So hope you all are doing okay. I'll be back sometime this week, and I hope that you all are staying safe. And if you're celebrating the holidays, have a happy holiday. I'll see y'all soon. So I've made a bunch of videos on the SBF-FTX saga, and I think a really high... when lenders were like, hey, can we have our money, please? Stop. Which is very JP Morgan era. Which is very JP Morgan era 1913 of CZ. Which is very JP Morgan era 19... You gotta breathe, Kyla. Which is very JP Morgan